So as I mentioned earlier, this webinar is based on data that we had collected over the years as part of CMMI appraisals. And a few years ago, we decided to look at that data in more detail because we did notice some anomalies. As shown here, all of these appraisals were conducted in Europe, North America, and South America. And we picked a subset of 40 for which we had collected extensive data. And the main anomalies we had detected is that in some cases we noticed that two organizations that had similar process maturity, that is, the practices both organizations had implemented were very same level, but the outcome was very different. For instance, we noticed at times also organizations that had a relatively low maturity and yet were very successful, and others had a relatively high maturity, lots of practices implemented, and yet the results were very disappointing. So it looked like some organizations were better than others at maximizing the outcome offered by opportunities they had of meeting their business objectives, and at minimizing the number and the severity of problems they had to deal with in the course of pursuing these objectives. So initially we didn't know exactly what to look at, and we put the hypothesis that if we take the CMMI as an example, but it applies to any model, be it or ITIL or any other models available, we said, well, if an organization masters only 25% of the process suggested by this model, so that's an assumption, which 25% can make a very big difference. So in order to achieve this ratio of 25%, which in this case I refer to as process capacity, which I will describe a little bit later in the presentation, the organization may have implemented the process suggested by the model such that each practice making up this process is implemented in a way that satisfies 25% of its intent. So that's why we get a process capacity of 25%. Now, alternatively, some practices may be fully satisfied, some others may be only partially satisfied, and others may not be implemented at all, such that the resulting average is still 25%. So there is a very large number of possible combinations that will give a 25% capacity ratio. Now, we also assume that if it were not true, the implementation of any subset of practices leading to a 25% implementation ratio would all result in the same performance. And that makes no sense. I mean, it says you can pick anything and you'll have the same performance. So there must be at least one combination of practices, at least one, resulting in a 25% implementation ratio that is better than all the others. And there must be at least one that is worse than all the others for a given organization, taking into account the context in which that organization operates. So essentially, this was when we were analyzing the data, we were trying to discover what was going on, what are the factors at stake in an organization. We focused here on IT organization, but the concept applies to any type of organization. So we had to come up with a method to analyze that data and to better see what was going on, gain insight as to what was going on. In order to do that, we came up with a method in which there were 4 main parameters. The first one is the risk mitigation capacity, RMC for short. The second one is the risk perception level, RPL. The third one is the likelihood of experiencing problems, which is shown here as LEP. And finally, the quality index. So let's see briefly what each of these parameters consists of. So RMC essentially corresponds to process maturity. It's what are the practices that are implemented to take advantage of opportunities and to prevent problems from occurring, and also for doing the work that has to be done. So in order to determine what is the RMC level, the risk mitigation capacity level of an organization, we use the surveys, we use interviews to investigate more, to understand more what these practices were all about. And at times we did use formal appraisals like ITMPI. So an RMC of 70% essentially means that the degree of implementation of key practices, and here we looked only at level 2 and level 3, is equal to 70%. 100% would mean that the intent of all practices is fully implemented. We focused on maturity levels 2 and 3, because the amount of data that we had available for maturity level 4 and level 5 was not very extensive, and as part of our appraisals, we did notice also that there was a lot of misinterpretation of what the practices are at level 4, maturity level 4, and maturity level 5. So we ignored these organizations. The data was not really reliable. So in examining and looking at these, what could have caused these anomalies, we did suspect that what makes an organization better than another, even though they may have the same number of practices implemented at the same degree, yet the outcomes are very different. I mean, people must have something in it. People must bring in something. That may be one factor that leads to differences. The other parameter is the risk perception level. And the risk perception level, as shown here, corresponds to the vulnerability that an organization will have problems as perceived by personnel in that organization. And the risk perception level indicator also provides an indication of how well an organization's process matches the opportunities to exploit or the problems to prevent in an organization. So this is where the people component comes into play. It does depend on personal experience to be able to judge a situation and to say, yes, we may have a problem here, we've seen it before, and this is what we should do in this case. It also depends on the process maturity, because the process maturity will provide the early warning signals that something may be wrong, and some action has to be taken as a result. An RPL, or risk perception level of 20%, essentially would tell me that in an organization, 1 out of every 5 undesirable situations that are liable to happen, or 1 out of every 5 desirable situations that are liable not to happen, will be anticipated and